Before we start the Shiur today, I want to dedicate today's Shiur Le'ilui Nishmosoi, or Le'ilui Nishmosom of two very, very special and precious people. Each of them was so close to my heart. So today's Shiur is dedicated Le'ilui Nishmosoi Shel Harav HaChosed Reb Yankev Doiv ben Harav Reb Yisrael. My wonderful and precious Mechutin, Reb Yankov Rosenboim, who was a great Machanech, the founder of the biggest girls' school in Monsey, an unbelievable person, Talmud Chochem, a tzaddik, and a very dear friend. And Chamishos B'Shvat is his very first yahrzeit. He should be a Melitz Yosef for the entire family. Shianuach b'sholom al mishkavay, and his tremendous chusim should be a merit to his children, to his family, and his many friends, and for Klal Yisrael. And I also dedicate today's Shiur Le'ilui Nishmos of my mother-in-law, my late wife's mother, Harabonis Hatzadekes Leah Bas Harav Eliyahu. She was a real Eishes Chayil. Standing together with my Shver, my father-in-law was the chief rabbi in Akko. He was one of the earliest Talmidim of the great Kloisenberger Rebbe in the days of Kloisenberg, before the Holocaust. He was a great Talmud Chochem and a great tzaddik. And she was his partner and Eishes Chayil. And she was a great tzaddikus. And today is her yahrzeit. So the Torah we learned today should be Le'ilui Nishmosa, and they should be Melitza Yosher on their families and for Klal Yisrael. So today's Shiur really has very little halachic implications, but it's a fascinating sugya anyway. And in this week's parsha, besides Shiras Hayam, which is the central sugya, we will not deal today with Shiras Hayam, but rather with Marah Nitztavu ala Shabbos. And the reason I speak about this sugya is because just a week ago, one of my unbelievable granddaughters, a 10-year-old, asked me a kasha. An amazing girl, and I won't mention her name, Mishum Eina Bisha. But HaKadosh Baruch Hu blessed me with such an unbelievable family, my children and grandchildren. Beli Ayin Hara, the Alida Imei Kavosam Teleid. We should all know Nachas and Simcha. So my 10-year-old granddaughter asked me an amazing question. And I was taken aback that I never thought of it. In Aseres Adibris, we have the mitzvah of Shabbos. Zocher es Yom Shabbos Lakadshoy, Shomer es Yom Shabbos Lakadshoy. But how do we know what are the Lametes Malachas? From the Mishkan. But they didn't have the mitzvah of Asiyas Mishkan until Parshas Truma, and on Parshas Yisrael we already have Shabbos. So how did they know what are the Lametes Malachas, and how could we keep Shabbos without knowing the Lametes Malachas? What a question for a 10-year-old child. So we will address the question, but before answering this question, I want to magnify it and intensify it. So in this week's parsha, Vayitzak al Hashem v'yorei Hashem eitz, when the water was bitter, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu shows Moshe a piece of wood. V'yash leich al hamayim v'yimteku hamayim, sham sam leich hoiku mishpat v'sham nisohu. Rashi on the spot writes, sham sam loim. B'mora nosna lehem miktzas parsha shel Torah sheis asku behem Shabbos poradim v'dinim. And that's a Gemara 3 times in Shas. Shabbos Pei Zayin Amid Beis and Heder Nun Zayin Amid Beis and Hori Ches Amid Beis. B'moro Nitztavo ala Shabbos. And that was way before Matan Torah. So once again, how did they know which are the Lametes Malachas? But it is not only the question, how did they know which are the Lametes Malachas? Some Achronim asked the question, Nochri Sheshavas Chayev Misa. It was before Ma'amad Har Sinai. Adayin lo nechnesu lebris. A non-Jew is prohibited from keeping Shabbos. So how is it possible? B'morah nitztavu ala Shabbos. Nochri Sheshavas Chayev Misa. We will examine different approaches dealing with this question. Some achronim, Chasam Soifer Shabbos Peizayin with the base quotes Nachlas Yankov. Before them, the Mizrachi, Rabbeinu Eliyahu Mizrachi ala Torah. In this parsha, they say that in Marah, they weren't commanded on Shmiras Shabbos, but rather Nosan lahem mikzas parsha shiit asku behem. They should start learning. It'll take them time to master Hilchas Shabbos. So in Marah, they were just given Shabbos shiit asku behem, just to learn, just to study. Lecha oira, the earliest source to this approach would be the Or Zarua. In his introduction to Hilchas Shabbos, the Or Zarua asks a slightly different question. In Sanhedrin Daf Nuntas we learn Kol mitzvah shenit lebnei Noach v'nishnaso b'Sinai lezeh v'lezeh nitno. Some mitzvahs were given to bnei Noach, like Avodah Zorah, Shvichas Damen, v'nishnu b'Sinai lezeh v'lezeh nitno. Bnei Noach and the Jewish people are mechuyev in these mitzvahs. So the Or Zarua asks, in B'Shabbos, in B'Morah Nitztavo ala Shabbos, that was before Matan Torah. And then, in Aseret HaDibros by Matan Torah, we once again have the mitzvah of Shabbos. Then Goyim should be included in this mitzvah. And the din is to the contrary. Nachrish Shavas Chayev Misa. So the Or Zarua writes, B'Morah Nitztavo ala Shabbos l'simona ba'alma. And it is unclear, what does he mean, l'simona ba'alma? L'cha'oira, what he means to say, it was not mamish a chiyuv of Shmiras Shabbos. If not, then what was it? In my opinion, regarding the kasha of the Or Zarua, I think the answer would be a very simple one. The mitzvahs that they got in Marah were not in the status of Bnei Noach. It was in the status of Bnei Yisrael, not in the status of Bnei Noach. True, they were not full-fledged Jews yet, but after all, HaKadosh Baruch Hu bochar bonu mekol ha'amim, and that happened by Yetzias Mitzrayim. He chose us amongst all the people. They were already after Milah. They were after Akruvas Korban Pesach. They had the mitzvah of Chodesh Hazeh, Lochem Rosh Chodoshim, Lochem. So they had a very unique and special status. They weren't entirely Yisrael till Ma'amad Har Sinai, but that has nothing to do with the Gemara called Mitzvah Shenitno Lebnei Noach V'Nishnaso B'Sinai. And what I say right now is a Toisus and Hori Yisches Omud Beis. Asora Mitzvahs Nitztavo B'Morah. The Gemara deals with the question, how about Milah and Shvichas Damim? So Toisus asks, no, that's actually Toisus' question. The Gemara deals, which mitzvahs did they get in Marah? And Toisus asks, so why doesn't the Gemara mention Milah and Shvichas Damim? Toisus says, Milah and Shvichas Damim were given to Bnei Noach. This Gemara in Horius Yudum and Beis, Netztavu Yisroel b'Marah. These mitzvahs were given to Bnei Yisrael before Matan Torah. They were not yet in the full status of individual Judaism, Jewry, but they were already the people of Israel, the chosen people. And that would be my answer to the kasha of the Or Zarua. This has nothing to do with mitzvahs shenitno lebnei Noach v'chazro v'nishno b'Sinai. So some great gedolim, starting off with the Or Zarua, the Mizrachi, the Chasam Sofer quoting Nachlas Yankov, B'Morah they only had the mitzvah of learning Torah, learning Hilchas Shabbos. But this is a Tema Gedolah. It doesn't fit in with the Gemara in Shabbos Pesayim because the Marah asks, in B'Morah Nitztav Shabbos, what do we do with V'Yisu Merafidim? They traveled more than Tchum Shabbos. And the Gemara answers, As Shabbos Nitztavo, Atchumim lo nifkidu. Shabbos, yes, but not Tchumin. So if we assume all they had was to learn, what's the kasha from V'Yisu Merafidim? It also goes against the Parsha. Pashtus Aksuvim, and especially Perush Rashi. So, when HaKadosh Baruch Hu gives them man, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, Erev Shabbos, you will have a double portion, Lechem Mishnah, and Shabbos there will be no man. And they didn't heed to what Moshe told them. Sheishes Yomam Tilkituhu, Uviyom Shish Shabbos, Lo Yihye Boi, Vayihi B'Yom Shvi, Yatzu Mino Am Lilkoit Veloy Matzo. Moshe told them, in Shabbos there will be no man. You're getting a double portion, Lechem Mishnah of Shabbos. B'Yom Shvi Yatzu Veloy Matzu. And then HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, V'yomer Hashem al Moshe Admona mi'antem lishmor mitzvoisai v'toiroisai. And Rashi brings, Admosai me'antem loshen rabim. HaKadosh Baruch Hu includes Moshe in the Teichacham. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu is angry, Kiviyochel. They came to Moshe Rabbeinu, and Rashi brings that Moshe Rabbeinu forgot to tell them. Vayigidu leMoshe, Shalu mahayom yomayim. Mikan yesh lilmad shadayin lo higid lehem Moshe Parshas Shabbos shenitztavu loim elehem b'Marah. Ad sheshalu al zois. Omer lehem, hu asher dibar Hashem shenitztavesi loim elochem. V'lekach anoshay hakosuv she'omer loi ad ono me'antem. So Rashi explains, HaKadosh Baruch Hu Kivyochel is angry with Moshe. Why didn't you tell them? I told you already in Marah to tell them about Shabbos. So the man was a later stage after Marah. And the Medrash teaches us, V'yisu medavko v'yachanu ba'olush. There was Zeichet to man in Olush. So where did they have the tzivui on Shmiras Shabbos? Was it Marah or Olush? Three sources in Shas that I quoted before, and Rashi in this week's Pasha, b'Marah nitztavo ala Shabbos. But Tosfos in Shabbos Pei Zayin says the very first Shabbos was in Olush, and that was the Shabbos in which they received the man. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, Yeshvu ish tachtov. You should keep Shabbos, and that's why Hayoim Lo timtzeuhu besoda. In Agoda Shel Pesach, one of the central prokim is Dayenu. And in this Perek, we give thanks and gratitude to HaKadosh Baruch Hu for all the gifts He bestowed upon us. And we say, Ilu hechilonu es aman, v'lo nosen lanu es Shabbos Dayenu. Ilu nosen lanu es Shabbos, v'lo kirvonu lefnei Har Sinai Dayenu. So the chronological order in this tefillah is Man, Shabbos, Sinai. But l'chayre Shabbos should come before the Man. Shabbos was in Marah, and the Man was in Olush. Mayim Amorim in this week's parsha comes before the Man. Seder Olam Rabosi. I don't know whether you all are familiar with this unbelievable sefer. It is the very first comprehensive history of B'nai Yisrael. So when I will ask many Jews, who was the first Jewish historian? Gretz? Dubnov? No. The great Tana, Rabbi Yossi ben Chalafta, Miyoim Brias Uolam, till the generation of Tanoim, Seder Olam Rabosi, and in Perek Hey, he writes the very first Shabbos the Jews had was in Olush, and he skips Marah. The Gaon, the Vilna Gaon, writes comments on Seder Olam. The Gaon was the only Gadol that wrote Hagois on Kol Torah Shebal Peh, without exception. Mishnayos, Shnois Eliyahu, Bavli, Yerushalmi, Sefra, Sefri, Tosefta, even Seder Olam. So the Gaon says, actually, B'Marah nitztavu ala Shabbos. But Moshe forgot to tell them. And therefore, in practicality, the first Shabbos was Olush. The Netziv, in his parish on Mechilta, this week's Parsha, the Netziv, explains, similar to the Chsam Sofer and the Mizrahi and the Or Zerua. Olush, they were commanded to keep Shabbos. Marah was just about learning Hilchos Shabbos. But as I said before, it goes against the Gemara Shabbos V'Zayin and against Rashi and the Psukim in this week's Parsha. And therefore, I think we need different approaches. I said at the beginning of today's Shiur, it's not really halacha l'maisa, but it does have some halachic implication, even though it's not very common. More than 170 years ago, there was a big controversy in Yerushalayim. There was a convert, a ger. Shemal v'lo toval. He was after Milah before Tvila. And it was Shabbos afternoon, and one of the Rabbanim in Yerushalayim was afraid. Suddenly it dawned upon him, it occurred to him, Nochish Yeshuvas Chayav Misa. So he ran and he told that ger, you need to do a malacha. Here, take a pencil, take a piece of paper, write a few letters. You should not be doomed. Nochish Yeshuvas Chayav Misa. And that is what he did. And most of the Gedolim Yerushalayim came out against him, and they said, we never heard that a ger shemar v'lo toval is prohibited from keeping Shabbos. So this question was sent to the Oroch Lanera in Altoona. Shalosh Tshuvas Binyan Siyan Chelak Aleph Siman Tzaddik Aleph. We find an amazing tshuva. And the Oroch Lanera writes, I think that psak was a mistake. And it is true. We never heard that a ger shemar v'lo toval cannot keep Shabbos. But why? After all, Chazal say mor v'lo toval ki'ilu lo mal. He is a goy l'chol davar. He is not defined as a Jew at all, so how could he keep Shabbos? The Ochana writes a Gevaldige Chiddush, and he says, B'moro nitztavu ala Shabbos. And Marah was between Milah and Tefillah. The entire people were mal v'lo tova. The basic assumption, the basic approach is what we learn in Yevamos Daf Mem Vav. The details of Gerus we learn from Avoseinu shebemidbar. Avoseinu lo nechnasu lebriselu b'milah v'tfilah v'hartzoas damim. Hartzoas dena means a korban. And that is why a ger, till the end of days, lo nechnas lebriselu b'milah v'tfilah v'korban. And a Krisis Daf Tes, the Gemara asks, so how could we accept gerim liachachor misamigdish if they can't bring a korban? And the Gemara answers, because in the Parsha of Geras, the Pasuk says, Lidoirei Seichem, throughout the ages, throughout the generations. And it is from this Pasuk that we learn that forever we could be Makabel Gerim, even though it will not be within our power to bring Karbonis. So Milah and Tefillah are Ma'akev, and Karbonis are not Ma'akev. So argues the Binyan Siyan, Milah was in Eretz Mitzrayim, before Korban Pesach. Tefillah was before Har Sinai. So Marah was the interim stage, and that is when it's Tavor Shabbos. And therefore ger shemar v'lo toval is entitled to keep Shabbos. Maybe he is even chayev to keep Shabbos, but that is a doubt for the Oroch Lanera in Sefer Binyan Siyan. The Oroch Lanera has a partner to this Chiddush, and that is the Avnei Nezer. Yoredei Siman Shin Nun Aleph. The Avnei Nezer had somewhat of a split personality, and I say this with a touch of humor, not chas v'sholem in any negative way. He was one of the greatest gedolim of his time, an unbelievable lamdan. He transformed the entire Derech HaLimud in Poland, and he was also a Rebbe and the leader of a Hasidic Chotza, Sochotchov. And in his tshuvas, he quotes the Zohar a lot. And he writes the same chiddush as the Oroch Lanera. But to the Avnei Nezer, it's not just permissible and maybe obligatory. The Avnei Nezer says, Ger shemar v'lo toval chayev b'shmiyas Shabbos, sharei b'moro nitztavu ala Shabbos. And he quotes the Zohar. The Zohar says, Somach l'milah, they were commanded to keep Shabbos in Marah. However, the Avnei Nezer is aware, and he says, this is a chiddush that goes against all the poskim and all the rishonim, because nowhere do we find ger shemar v'lo toval is chayev in Shabbos. And it's also unreasonable, because Einoi Ger. But maybe if the Rishonim would see the Zohar, they would change their opinion. So the Avnei Nezer is indecisive at the end of the tshuva. Is he chayiv b'Shabbos or not? The Avnei Nezer does not deal with the question that was in Yerushalayim. He just writes halacha v'lo l'maisa. What is clear from the Binyan Sian and the Avnei Nezer that their interpretation, the Marah and Tztav Shabbos, is Shmiras Shabbos Mamish, because otherwise, what does it have to do with Gershom Marah v'Leitov v'Lagabi Shmiras Shabbos? Marah and Tztav lilmoid avelo lekayim. I disagree with the entire approach of the Binyan Sian and the Avnei Nezer. And my feeling is yes. We do learn from Avoseinu b'Midbar what the process of Gerus is. What is demanded from a Ger? What are the fundamentals of Gerus? Mila, Tfila, Vartzos, Domim. But let me make this clear. What happened in the Midbar and in Har Sinai is not Hilchas Gerus Mamish. A Ger must take upon himself all mitzvahs. They did so in a collective fashion. But what would happen if an individual would say, no, I don't like the idea. I prefer being a Ben Noach. What? Then he wouldn't be included in the Jewish people? We learn Gerus from Har Sinai. But Har Sinai was different. It was unique. It was only once in history, that an entire nation was Mesgaya. And that is in essence different than individuals. So I do not think we could learn halachas from Mamid Har Sinai. But Moro Nitztavo al Shabbos, that was unique, that was special. It doesn't fit into the context of halacha. And we cannot learn from here the Gershom Malva Leitova Ledoiris Olam Chayev B'Shmiras Shabbos. And that is clear to me. It is clear to the Avnei Nezer as well when he says, nowhere do we find in Poskim or in Shas or anywhere the Gershom Malva Leitova Chayev. I'm just explaining why. And to me, we cannot learn this halacha from Mamad Har Sinai. So let's get back to Marah. When exactly was the first Shabbos? Maybe Marah, maybe Olush, when they were commanded, Yeshvo ich tachtov, you shouldn't go out and you shouldn't try to collect the man because you won't have man on Shabbos. So some Gedolim say it wasn't Etzivui Lishmiya Shabbos, but merely learning the halachas. I said before that goes against the Gemara Shabbos Peisayin and against Rashi and against Pshuto Shel Mikra in this week's Parsha. Some Gedolim said, no, Marah is a chiyuv of Shmiya Shabbos, but not in its entirety. Ponim Yafos, the great Hafla, Sifrei Ala Torah. Ponim Yafos says, they had a mitzvah to keep Shabbos in general, but not the details. And we don't know. Ein Bachlal Ela Masha B'Prat. What is there in Shmiras Shabbos besides the details, besides the Lametes Malachas? Which brings us back to the question which we started today's Shiur, but they didn't have the Mishkan yet. So what would the Ponim Yafos mean? Klal Veloy Protim. Well, we could argue he means the Ramban. Very famous Ramban Pashas Yisrael, and the Ritva Rosh Hashanah Lamed Beis quotes it in the name of the Ramban. A gem that we received from the Ramban. Margoli es toivish b'yadeinu mebeis medrosha miterosu shel Rabbeinu Ramban. So the Ramban says, Shmiras Shabbos is an asay, mitzvah asay Shabbosan, and a lav, lo sasa kol malacha. The lav refers to lametes malachas. The asay refers to the most practical and simpler interpretation of Shavisa, rest. HaTorach v'ha'omol nesru ba'asei, ha'malachas nesru b'lo ta'aseh. According to the Ramban, you want to switch around the furniture in your house, and you leave it for Shabbos because all week you're busy on your job. So Shabbos, a person davens with the nates in the morning, tefillas v'sikin, and then he rolls up his sleeves and he schleps tables and chairs and couches and cupboards, and he's working hard, but he didn't do any malacha. He didn't build, he didn't take apart. According to the Ramban, bitul mitzvah sasei shel Shabbosa, and this needs to be a rest day. So we could offer this explanation to the Ponim Yovas, but it doesn't seem likely. What are you gaining by saying they only had some of Shabbos, but not the entire Shabbos? What are you gaining? The Kli Chemda says something similar to the Ponim Yovas, and he quotes the Tzafnas Paneach. To me, it's either everything or nothing. So some Achronim say it's only learning Hilchas Shabbos. But I said that goes against the Gemara. L'choira, why wouldn't we say Shabbos in its entirety? The Gemara in Shabbos Pei Zayin says, "A Shabbos ifkedu, a Tchumen lo ifkedu." So Tchumen is set apart, but Shabbos in its entirety. So how did they know which are the malachas? But that is a question relevant not only to Marah, not only to Olush, even to Har Sinai. So what I explained to my beautiful granddaughter is twice in Shas at the end of Kedushin and Yom HaChav Ches, Kiyam Avrom Avinu Kol HaTorah Kula Ad Shelo In'ino. Erev Tavshilin. So how did he know what are Lamates Malachas? Obviously Ruach HaKodesh. Moshe Rabbeinu knew what are the Lamates Malachas because the Kodesh Baruch Hu taught him Kol HaTorah Kula. Yes. The source, the reasoning, the rationale, how do we determine what are those malachas, are the Mishkan. But Avraham Avinu knew what they are, and definitely Moshe Rabbeinu knew what they are. So it'll take some time. Klal Yisrael will realize, where are these malachas derived from? From where do they come, and what are they based? That'll take time till they learn about the Akamas HaMishkan. But Moshe Rabbeinu, Mepia Gevura, already taught them by Ma'amid Har Sinai, maybe by Olush, and maybe even by Marah, what are those Lametes Malachas? That would be Pashtus. And this brings me to a Gavaldig Chiddush of the Pnei Yeshua and Shabbos Mem Vav. The Pnei Yeshua says a great Chiddush, and he retracts Torch Kadei Dibba. And rightfully so. But it still is interesting what the Havamin of the Pnei Yeshua was. So the Pnei Yeshua wants to argue, Malacha she'ein tzricha legufa leReb Shimon, poto machatas, poto mamakes v'mises bezdin, but it's an issa diuraisa. Why would that be? Because Maleches Machsheves is associated with the Mishkan. But Nistavo l'Shabbos b'Morah. And by Marah, there still was no din of Maleches Mosheves. And Marah, there also was no Chatas and Koras and Mises Bezdin. So the Pnei Yeshua argues, Maleches Mosheves, that Patas Malachas She'en Sichel Agufa is just from the Chatos, but it's an Issa Diuraisa because of Marah. But then the Pnei Yeshua quotes a raya from a Gemara Meforeshes that Malachas She'en Sichel Agufa is not an Issa Diuraisa, so he retracts. But what about his argument? And I wonder about the Havan of the Pnei Yeshua, because I made this clear many times when I teach Hilchos Shabbos. Maleches Machsheves not only patters Malachas She'en Tzricha Legufa, it is the fundamental definition of all Malachas Shabbos. And almost all the halachas of Shabbos that are Menatayra are based on Maleches Machsheves. So if we would accept the reasoning of the Pnei Yeshua in his Havi Amina, the same would need to apply to Kalachayad, to Makalkal, to Malachas She'en Miskeyemes, because all these are potter because they're not Maleches Machsheves. And I wrote about this at great length, Minchas Oshal Masechet Shabbos, which is now in print, a reprint, Minchas Oshal Parshas Vayakel, Chumash Shemois. And there are tens of sugyas, Gemors Meforoshes, Mekalkal, Malachas She'en Miskeyemes, Kalachayad, or only Osam Derabanan. So this rejects the idea of the Pnei Yeshua, and it brings me back once again to say, no. Yes, it'll take time. Maleches Machsheves b'mishkan hi dechasiv. But Moshe Rabbeinu already knew all the details of Hilchos Shabbos. And it is those details that he taught Bnei Yisrael b'Mamad Har Sinai and in Olush and even in Marah. So up to this very point, I offer two different approaches and interpretations regarding B'Morah Nitztavo ala Shabbos. One, expressed by many Gedolim, not the Chiyuv Halocha L'Mais of keeping Shabbos, of observing Shabbos, but rather, she is asku behem, learn. And as I said, it goes against the Gemara, against Pshuto Shel Mikro, against Rashi. The other would be full-fledged Shabbos, al kol pruteo v'digdukeo. But the Ramban is a compromise, and the Ramban, as always, Rosh Medabrim b'kol makom. Whatever he says is a gem. The Ramban of this week's Parsha, Ramban al Torah, quoting Rashi, Miktzas Parsha she is asko behen. So the Ramban writes, explaining Rashi, Kodesh Baruch Hu gave him Parsha she is asko behen, not as a chiyuv gomer, but like Avraham Ovinu, lahargilem b'mitzvahs, v'nanasoisom yimekablu oisom b'simcha v'betuv v'leivav. And that is what the posuk means, Sham sam lo yechoyko mishpat v'sham nisohu. Nisohu means an asayan. He put them to test. Will they be mekabel the Torah b'simcha v'betuv v'leivav? Yesh la'ayin b'kavonas Ramban. Does the Ramban mean the same as the Mizrahi, Nachlas Yankov, Chasam Sofer? Cannot be, because then we would have those unbelievable and powerful kashas on the Ramban, and that's not acceptable. When analyzing the Ramban, it is clear to me that Ramban is a new approach, and the Ramban says, Kodesh Baruch Hu tells Moshe Rabbeinu, teach them Shabbos, tell them about Shabbos. And I wish to see, will they take upon themselves Shmira Shabbos out of their free will? B'simcha v'betuv v'leivav. Or will they say, no, this is too hard, and it will need to wait till I impose Shabbos on them in Mamad Har Sinai? Put them to test. Tell them about Shabbos. Encourage them to value Shabbos, to cherish Shabbos, to take it upon themselves before I give them a command. Like Avraham Avinu. And that is why the Ramban quotes Avraham Avinu. And he also writes, Lahargileim b'mitzvahs. If it's just learning, that is not Lahargileim b'mitzvahs. So HaKadosh Baruch Hu tells Moshe Rabbeinu, tell them about Shabbos. Teach them about Shabbos. Because when time comes and they will need to keep Shabbos, I want them to be in it, to be into it. I want them to already have the feel of Kedushas HaShabbos. Like Avraham Avinu shekiyam kol haTorah kula ad shelo nitno. At least Shabbos they should keep. Largilem b'mitzvahs ulenasoisom im yekablu es a Shabbos b'simcha v'betuv v'leivav. That's an amazing chiddush, and it's beautiful. It fits into Rashi. She is asku bohem, and it also is miyashiv the kash of the Gemara v'Yisur Merafidim, because it is totally impossible, beyond unreasonable, impossible, that Moshe Rabbeinu or the entire people didn't care for HaKadosh Baruch Hu's will, and they all traveled. V'Yisur Merafidim. That is impossible. And it also explains why HaKadosh Baruch Hu Kivyochel is angry with Moshe. Why didn't you tell them in Marah? Why did you wait till Olush? Why did you wait now? I wanted to see them observing Shabbos. I wanted to see them taking upon themselves Shabbos b'simcha v'betuv leivav. That's Pshat in the Ramban. So now, looking back, that would be my interpretation of the Or Zarua as well that I quoted in the beginning of this year. So the Or Zarua asked, if B'Morah Nitztavo ala Shabbos, then it's mitzvah shenitztavo b'nei Noach v'nishnasa b'Sinai. Why aren't goyim mechuyev in Shmiyas Shabbos? I offered my interpretation, and that is different. And I think, to me, it seems Toras Emes. But I want to explain what the Or Zarua says, and I think the Or Zarua fits in beautifully with the Ramban. So the Or Zarua says, in Marah, it wasn't a command. So it's not a mitzvah shenitztavu b'nei Noach v'nishnasu b'Sinai. In Marah, it was a recommendation. It was a suggestion, and not a chiyuv, and therefore it has nothing to do with the Gemara in Sanhedrin Nuntes, mitzvah shenitztavu b'nei Noach v'chazro v'nishnu b'Sinai. So what does he mean, l'simona ba'alma? I don't know. This definition is somewhat perplexing, but I still would suggest Simona ba'alma means just teach them, let them know, and let them cherish Shabbos. And I want to see, will they take Shabbos upon themselves b'simcha v'betuv levav? So I find this a fascinating sugya. We started today's Shiur with a pasuk, Sham samlei chaykel mishvat v'sham nisau. And then HaKadosh Baruch Hu tells Moshe Rabbeinu, V'hoyu im shemoya tishma l'Hashem Elokecha. V'yosha be'einav ta'aseh ve'ezanto le'mitzvosav v'shomarto kol chukov. Kol ha'machalo asher samti b'Mitzrayim lo yosem olecha ki ani Hashem roifecha. And this pasuk seems to be so relevant to our life today in Israel and in the entire Jewish world. We are still in the midst of this terrible pandemic. Maybe even at the height of this terrible pandemic. At least in Eretz Yisrael, we are at the worst stage. It's almost a year since COVID-19 burst upon the world stage. And many times in the past year, we thought it's over. Again and again, I said, I do not think it's over. It isn't over yet. We still need to be careful. And now it's just heart-wrenching and it's so painful. Now that we are already having these vaccinations, especially in Israel, millions of people are vaccinated. 500,000 people already got the second dose. And on the other hand, more people are dying than ever before. And it's tragic. It didn't need to be. It could have been prevented, at least to a certain extent. So on one hand, we're vaccinating. The vaccine seems to be very effective. It is too early to tell with all these different mutations. And therefore, I think even those that already got the second dose, like me, still need to be very cautious. But it is tragic that more people are infected than ever before, and many more are dying, and young people this time around. My mother got COVID this week, and she is ill to my dismay. Obviously, she got the disease a few days before she got the second dose of the vaccine, and we weren't aware because she developed slight symptoms which I wasn't aware of. She's doing relatively fine, and the doctors say probably because she was already vaccinated. But she needs rachamei shamayim because at age 92, with many underlying medical issues, she is extremely feeble and in a very precarious condition. So I do ask all my precious Talmidim and all those that learn my Torah, say a few prokom of Tehillim for her. She's an unbelievable woman. Fradel Bas Leah, she'Kodesh Baruch Hu yishlach refuah shleima min hashamayim. So on one hand, there is so much hope. 500,000 people already got the second dose. On the other hand, this is so painful. So many people are dying, young and old. And it doesn't really make a difference between young and old because we're Machal Shabbos for Chai Isho. We're Machal Shabbos and we eat Yom Kippur for 1 minute of life. And life is not measured necessarily by years or by months. So we need to hope and daven. Kol ha'machalo asher samti b'Mitzrayim lo yosem olecha. Ki ani Hashem roifecha. There's a word of the Goin. Maybe it's a vertel, maybe it's a word. B'leila Seder, we enumerate how many makas did HaKadosh Baruch Hu bring on the Egyptians. In Mitzrayim, Alayam, 10, 20, 30, 50, 100, 150. Seems to be almost like competition. How many makas could we find? What's the point? So it's said in the name of the Goim, because HaKadosh Baruch Hu promises, Kol HaMachla shesamti b'Mitzrayim lo yosim olecho. So the more the better. The more torture and pain and suffering and disease and illness they had, we will be salvaged from. And therefore, Kol HaMachla shesamti b'Mitzrayim lo yosim olecho. But what are the conditions? What does HaKadosh Baruch Hu demand? Im shemoya tishma l'kol Hashem Elokecha. Vayosha bein avtasa. Ve'azanto le'mitzvosa. Ve'shamartu kol chukov. It is then. Kol ha'machla shesamti b'Mitzrayim lo yosem olecha. So for the past year, almost every time I spoke about the pandemic, on one hand, I plead and begged and cried and shouted at the top of my lungs, be careful, follow the rules, vaccinate. But on the other hand, every time I also said, let us not forget about Hashgacha Protis. Im Hashem lo yivna b'yeshav amru boinav boyim Hashem lo yishmo yeshav shakat shoyma. HaKadosh Baruch Hu is roifei chol baso umafli la'asois. He is the roifei cholim. Mochatzti va'ani erpo. And therefore, besides wearing masks and social distancing and vaccinating, we need to daven, we need to learn, we need to be better. For the past year, since Chodesh Adar, in my shul, every morning, the entire congregation says 3 Pirkei Tehillim. Chof Mem Aleph Kuf Lamed. 3 short prokim. But these 3 prokim have special significance b'shas tzora and dealing with illness. It's not much, it's not enough. But Chazal teaches echod amar ve'echod amamet u'belvad sheyechaven liboy l'shomayim. We need to daven. And we need to be better. And it is then that we will be zeicha to racham mishamayim. Kol ha'machalo shesamti b'Mitzrayim lo yosem alecho ki ani Hashem roifecha. Roifecha with a pei refuyo. But when the Torah deals with doctors administering medicine, the Pasuk says, V'rapo yerapeh, with a pei degusha. Rabbeinu Bachye explains, when people heal, when doctors heal, it usually involves pain and suffering. Whether it's surgery, radiation, chemotherapy, drugs, medicines, most medical procedures are involved with some suffering. But when HaKadosh Baruch Hu sends refuas min hashamayim, it is with a pei refuyo. It is without pain and suffering. V'rapo yerape mekan shenitnu reshus l'roifa l'rapo ki ani Hashem roifecha. Especially when HaKadosh Baruch Hu prevents illness. So let us try to be better, learn more Torah, daven more and daven better. Let us give a helping hand one to another and daven and hope. HaKadosh Baruch Hu should send refuas and yeshuas, and we should be zeicha to be as Mashiach Tzidkenu, b'mehero v'yomeinu, amen.